Beneath the frozen silence of Montana's forests, a single scream tears the winter apart and sets a quiet officer and his German shepherd on a collision course with secrets buried deeper than snow. When one life is caught in a steel trap and another in the grip of old regrets, how far would you go to pull someone from the darkness? What if the worst danger is hiding in plain sight? Before you answer, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Your story might be closer than you think. Morning crept softly over Kootenay National Forest, diffusing a gauzy, pale light through the needles of 1,000 pines. Out here, the sun didn't so much rise as filter in, caught in the breath of winter that hung over the Yaak River Valley. Ice glazed the trunks in glassy veins, and every branch, every blade of frozen grass, carried the hush of a world not quite awake, not quite at rest. The cold was the sort that found its way into the bones, but it was honest, straightforward. Montana cold, with nothing to prove. Officer Nolan Pierce drove the forest road with one hand steady on the wheel and the other resting near the old thermos wedged beside the radio. The patrol SUV, a battered Chevy with too many memories in the upholstery, moved slow, tires whispering over packed snow. The engine's hum was the only thing louder than his own heartbeat. In the rear seat, Rook sat perfectly still, eyes following the patterns of light and movement outside, chest rising and falling in calm sync with the man he trusted. Nolan sometimes wondered if the dog was reading the forest too, catching stories in every gust of wind, every shift of shadow on snow. Nothing about the morning was urgent. This was a day like any other in early January, before the true deep freeze settled and when a person could almost believe the world held still. The valley around Yaak River Road looked sculpted by absence. Far off, the river glinted, mostly frozen, the surface marbled with thin blue cracks. Nolan pulled over, turned off the engine, and listened. No other vehicles, no distant chainsaws or snowmobiles, just the slow wind and a pair of ravens fussing in the branches above. His life in this far corner of Montana was not the sort that made for headlines. Most mornings, his patrols ended with more hours spent pulling a neighbor's truck from a drift, or clearing debris after windstorms than in pursuit of anything resembling crime. He liked it that way. Routine, honest work, the quiet certainty of being needed, if only in small, practical ways. He'd spent the better part of 2 decades as a high school auto shop teacher, before something in him grew restless, a hunger for work that felt necessary. But it wasn't trauma or loss that brought him north, not some desperate escape. He'd left behind nothing more than a workshop full of half-finished projects and a string of farewells written on the chalkboard. Montana drew him for reasons he couldn't quite name. The scale of its silence, maybe, or the dignity of things built to last. The neighbors out here recognized him by the sound of his laugh, the boots he wore, and the tools always rattling in the back of his truck. Rook was never more than a step behind. The German Shepherd had been a volunteer search and rescue dog, back when the local SAR unit was flush with grants and eager hands. But the world changed. Funding dried up, and Rook, still young, still restless, ended up in Nolan's care. The two of them became partners by necessity and then by affection. Together, they walked fence lines after storms, tracked lost hikers, even comforted a neighbor's trembling child after a night lost in the woods. If Nolan was the hands and feet, Rook was the nose and heart. A presence so steady that even the trees seemed to lean a little closer when he passed. Nolan's own hands were rough and chapped, scarred from years at the lathe and engine block. He measured his worth by what he could build, repair, or steady, a man who trusted in the plain dignity of action. He wore a badge now, but never stopped thinking like a teacher. Patient, deliberate, quietly rooting for those who'd nearly given up on themselves. On winter days like this, he remembered the shop class lull, the heat of a soldering iron, the metallic tang of oil, the hush before a student's first small triumph. Driving slowly along the Yak River Road, he kept an eye out for more than just infractions. A downed tree, a boot print in a place it shouldn't be, smoke where there should be none. Each was a clue, a gentle reminder that he belonged to a web of lives stretched thin over this expanse. The road twisted through stands of pine and fir, their shadows striped across the snow. Occasionally he'd glimpse the tracks of a moose or a fox, pressed sharp and fleeting into the crust. Rook shifted in the back, his ears suddenly alert, nose twitching at the air seeping through the cracked window. Nolan smiled, reaching up to scratch the old scar behind the dog's ear, a habit formed on endless, patient evenings after long searches. They didn't need words. A dog like Rook was bred for vigilance, for the slow, deliberate work of noticing what others overlooked. Nolan learned to trust those small signals, the tilt of a head, the stillness before movement. His radio crackled, offering nothing but static and a faint suggestion of distant voices. He reached for the thermos, poured a measure of coffee that had gone tepid in the cold, and sipped. The flavor was a mix of memory and habit, burnt and comforting all at once. There was a serenity to these hours, the slow movement of day breaking through the inertia of winter. Nolan checked the dashboard clock, already knowing he was early for his rounds, but content to linger. Somewhere ahead, the forest waited with its usual reticence, offering nothing, promising only the chance to be present. In this landscape, loneliness was both companion and challenge. It demanded a person reckon with himself. No distractions, no easy escape. But in that reckoning, Nolan found a kind of peace. The world was bigger than his troubles. Every so often the wind shifted, and he caught the scent of wood smoke, distant but real, a sign that somewhere, someone was tending to their own quiet life, carving a place out of the wilderness, just as he did. Nolan rolled the window down a notch, letting the cold seep in, letting the air carry whatever stories it held. Rook's eyes caught his in the rear view. The connection was wordless but absolute, a silent promise that whatever the day brought, they would face it together. Out here, amidst the hush and the cold, that was enough. The world was vast, yes, but so was the capacity for loyalty, for resilience, for the slow, steadfast work of holding on. And so the day began, with Nolan and Rook moving through the hush of winter, two lives woven into the quiet, ready for whatever broke the silence next. The day was drawing on in that subtle way winter days do, shadows sliding quietly down the mountainsides, blue light gathering under the pines. Nolan had just slowed to navigate a patch of rutted ice when Rook suddenly tensed in the back seat. Ears up, eyes fixed, the fur along his back rising. Nolan felt the change in the air before he understood it, a pressure that made his breath hold. Sometimes a dog knows before a man does. Nolan braked, rolling to a stop by the shoulder, gravel ticking under the tires. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint whine of wind in the branches and the distant hush of the river. Then he heard it, a noise so faint it almost vanished into the forest's hush. Not a call for help, not the frantic bark of a lost pet or the crash of a tree falling. It was a sound nearly choked by distance and snow, A thin, ragged whimper, then silence. The sort of sound that demanded attention, the kind that seemed to thread itself straight into the heart. He cut the engine. The quiet that followed was a physical thing, heavy, pressing in on all sides. Rook was already moving, nosing the handle of the door with a sense of mission so pure it startled Nolan from thought into action. The man stepped out, boots crunching on hard-packed snow, his breath rising in pale bursts. The air had a bite that felt more than cold, as if the forest itself was tensed in expectation. Rook landed beside him, paws silent, nostrils flaring. Together, they listened. The world seemed suspended, every branch, every drift, holding its breath. Then, again, a whimper, cut off sharply, lost behind a wall of spruce and ice. They moved into the trees, Rook leading, Nolan careful to follow without breaking the dog's focus. The snow was deep here, each step a test of patience and strength. Nolan's legs burned with the cold, the damp sinking through denim and into skin. The forest felt close, muffled and watchful, as if they were intruders in a cathedral of frost. Nolan found himself reading every sign, the way the wind eddied, the way small birds burst from the brush and vanished into the blue shadow. A few yards in, Rook stopped, stiffened, and pointed with his nose. Nolan knelt, scanning the ground. There, a patch where the snow was churned, a scatter of pine needles streaked with something darker, a torn scrap of fabric, blue-green, pressed into the ice. Not far off, the faint metallic scent of something unnatural. Nolan's pulse quickened, every sense sharpened. He pressed on, ducking under a tangle of low branches, ice snapping at his coat. Another sound, a gasp, then silence. And then, as the trees thinned, he saw her. The girl was crumpled at the base of a thick old pine, her hair tangled with snow and leaves, her face pinched and raw with cold. One leg was bent beneath her at an impossible angle. As Nolan drew closer, details flickered into focus. The raw edge of her jeans, the pale shape of her ankle caught in the brutal iron mouth of a bear trap. Old, rusted, its springs biting deep. There was no blood pooling on the surface, just a slow seep that turned the snow beneath her dark and crystalline. Her coat, once heavy and new, was torn open, the lining matted with ice. Nolan felt a flash of horror. No room for panic, so only the old automatic calculus of triage. He knelt, speaking quietly, not for comfort, but to ground himself in the world's reality. Rook lay beside the girl, body angled to block the wind, his head lowered, a quiet guardian. The girl's eyes fluttered, wild with pain and something deeper, fear, perhaps, or the fragile hope that maybe she'd been found by someone who meant help, not harm. No words passed between Nolan and Rook, nor did the girl try to speak at first. Everything in the clearing revolved around breath and movement, the slow, careful work of not making things worse. Nolan's hands, usually so steady with tools or steering wheels, found themselves trembling as he reached for his first aid kit. He worked with the gentleness of a man who had taught children how to solder and saw, conscious that the difference between help and harm is often just a matter of patience. He wrapped her in his extra coat, checking her pulse, the state of her breathing. Her skin was icy, her lips pale, but there was a tenacity in her grip as she clung to consciousness. Nolan saw something in her gaze, a history of fighting to survive, a refusal to fade away. As he examined the trap, Rook's posture changed. The dog's head turned, nostrils flaring, eyes narrow. He stared into the trees, the direction from which they had come. Nolan followed his gaze, heart kicking hard. For a moment, the forest seemed empty, but then a flicker of movement, a faint glint of light. Someone, somewhere, sweeping a flashlight between the trunks. The beam danced for a moment, vanished, then reappeared, wavering, searching. Then, suddenly, it snapped off, leaving only darkness and a heavy, unspoken question. Nolan's mind leapt, connecting what he saw in the girl's injuries, the position of the trap, the odd, uneasy sense that they weren't alone. This wasn't an accident. Someone had put this here. Someone was close to, and maybe, just maybe, they were watching right now. He steadied his breath, tightened his grip on Rook's collar, and made a silent promise to the girl, to himself, and to the still, watchful woods. Whatever happened next, he would not leave her here. Not in this loneliness. Not in this pain. Rook shifted closer, pressing his body against the girl's side, a living wall against the cold and the unknown. For a moment, the three of them, man, dog, and wounded stranger, were bound together in the hush, suspended between danger and the hope that someone, at last, had come. In the distance, a raven called, harsh and insistent, echoing through the forest. Nolan shivered. The day had turned. The silence had broken, and nothing would be the same after this. Nolan's breath plumed into the air as he moved in slow, careful motions, the world narrowing to the circle of snow around the girl and the quiet signals from Rook. The cold pressed in from all sides, amplifying the smallest sound. The crunch of boots, the click of metal, the ragged flutter of the girl's breathing. Every movement had to be measured. Every second, Nolan's mind raced through possibilities, weighing pain against time, safety against the urgency that prickled along his spine. The bear trap was old, the steel dark with years of weather, but its jaws were merciless. Nolan worked to brace the springs with a tire iron, hands aching from the cold and the strain. The girl, barely conscious, tensed at his touch, but did not cry out, her focus fixed on the distant trees. Rook pressed close, blocking the wind, head angled to keep the edge of the forest in his sight. There was a stillness to the dog that Nolan recognized, a sentinel's patience, honed in the quiet between disaster and response. He spoke only to break the silence, words simple and steady. "You're safe now. We'll get you out." The reassurance was for both of them, a thread to cling to against the rising undertow of fear. The trap resisted, metal groaning under the force, but finally, with a desperate push, the jaws opened enough for Nolan to ease her leg free. Blood welled along the ragged line, quickly staunched with a makeshift bandage torn from Nolan's own undershirt. The girl shivered but stayed silent, sweat and tears freezing on her cheeks. He wrapped her in his thickest jacket, careful not to jostle the injury, then lifted her with a strength born of necessity. She was light, far too light for someone her age, her frame all bone and exhaustion. As Nolan moved toward the road, Rook circled ahead, every sense attuned to danger. The forest no longer felt empty. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped, not the idle sound of wind, but the deliberate break of something heavy, or someone careless. At the edge of the trees, the snow was marked by the path they'd made coming in, but also by a different set of tracks, wider, shallower, marked with the chevron tread of an ATV tire. Mixed in, smaller prints, boots, spaced unevenly, leading not toward the road, but deeper into the timber. Nolan noted these details even as he hurried, the pattern of snow and mud telling a silent story. He saw, too, a scrap of brown cloth tangled on a branch, dusted with powdery sawdust. He pocketed it without pausing, the scent of oil and metal clinging to his gloves. He reached the SUV and lowered the girl onto the back seat, propping her leg with a folded blanket, adjusting the heat to full. Rook climbed in, shaking snow from his coat, then positioned himself so that his body shielded the girl from the doors and the outside world. The girl's eyes never left Nolan, searching his face for some sign of what would happen next. Her voice, when it came, was little more than a rasp, breathless and broken. "Don't take me back. Don't take me anywhere near that trail. There's a place. They keep people. Not just me." Her head dropped again, spent by the effort. Nolan felt the chill settle deeper in his chest. He didn't ask more, not yet. The details would come later, in their own time. He started the engine, letting the SUV idle in the cold while he thought through their next steps. Standard protocol would be to drive straight to the hospital in Libby, but instinct made him hesitate. Those tracks in the snow, the flash of a light in the woods, the girl's desperate plea, all of it suggested that this was no random accident. Someone might be watching the main roads, or worse, waiting for a chance to intercept. The Yacht Ranger Station was less than 5 miles away, a place long since abandoned by the Forest Service but sturdy enough to shelter them, hidden among thick pines and far from easy sightlines. It would buy time to tend to the wound, to collect his thoughts, to figure out who or what was lurking just out of view. He drove with headlights off, crawling through the ruts and switchbacks, tires crunching over frozen ground. The sun was sinking fast now, laying bars of gold and shadow across the hills. The station appeared as a dark shape among the trees, roof thick with snow, windows rimed with frost. Inside, the air was frigid but still. Nolan swept the place quickly. No sign of intrusion, only the faint, dusty odor of old pine and forgotten papers. He laid the girl on a cot near the wood stove, stuffed the belly of it with kindling, and coaxed a reluctant fire to life. Rook patrolled the single room, nose skimming every wall, every crack, before settling with a low, uneasy whine beside the girl. Nolan worked to clean and rewrap her wound, hands steady despite the adrenaline. The girl drifted in and out of awareness, murmuring once about a mill and people with masks who came at night. Nolan didn't push, just listened, letting her voice anchor him in the moment. Outside, night pressed in. Through the frost-glazed window, the last blue edge of daylight faded into shadow. Somewhere out there, in the vast, indifferent dark, those other tracks led away, toward secrets, toward danger, toward answers he wasn't sure he wanted. Inside, though, the world narrowed to 3. A girl half lost, a dog who never looked away, and a man who understood that sometimes the work of rescue begins with staying. He banked the fire, checked the locks, and waited for whatever the night would bring. Night fell quickly in the mountains, settling around the Yacht Ranger Station like a heavy quilt, thick with secrets. Inside, the fire in the old wood stove breathed warmth into the small, pine-walled room, its glow pushing shadows into the corners. The smell of thawing boots and burning sap mingled with the coppery tang of blood, and the faint, sweet smoke of resin rose to the rafters. Nolan Pierce moved quietly through the space, his steps soft on warped floorboards, never quite letting his back turn to the window. Out here, every hour after sunset felt borrowed. He checked the locks, a habit from his years living alone, a wedge under the door, the ancient pane above the sink, sealed tight. He watched the snow fall through glass laced with frost, feeling the weight of the land pressing close. It wasn't just the threat outside. It was the bone-deep knowledge that winter in Montana had its own hunger. Every creak of timber, every shift of wind became part of the story. The girl, Elena, she had managed to whisper, her voice fraying at the edges, slept unevenly. Her brow furrowed, lips moving in silent worry, even as exhaustion dragged her toward rest. The fresh bandage on her ankle showed the early blush of bruising beneath white gauze. Rook curled nearby, chin on paws, eyes flicking from girl to window, never fully at ease. Every so often, the German shepherd would rise, stretch, and press his nose to the crack beneath the door, as if the scent of danger hung just out of reach. Nolan busied himself, stoking the stove with a patient, practiced rhythm. He set a tin cup of water beside Elena, brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, and left his own jacket draped over her blanket. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. In the hush, there was an unspoken exchange, gratitude, fear, trust barely blooming. Outside, the wind carried fragments of sound. Nolan paused in the dim, watching his own breath curl through the light. Was that a distant engine, muffled by trees? The echo of a footstep on icy gravel? He listened, waited. Nothing. Only the low moan of winter pressing against the walls. With time, Elena's breathing eased. In the glow of the fire, color returned to her cheeks. When she finally stirred, her eyes opened wide, startled, then flickered to Nolan with uncertain recognition. He didn't ask questions at first. He let her speak on her own terms, filling the quiet with small gestures, refilling her water, adding wood to the stove, tending to Rook's ears with slow, reassuring scratches. When Elena found her words, they came halting, voice frayed but determined. They kept talking about Millstone, a place, an old lumberyard, I think. I saw the sign once, faded, wooden, near a gravel turnoff. They brought people there at night, blindfolded us for the drive. Sometimes I'd smell oil, metal, sawdust, loud engines. I wasn't the only one. She stopped, eyes watering, face turned to the wall. Rook shifted closer, his heavy head resting on her thigh. His quiet presence seemed to lend her some small comfort, a reminder that not all hands, not all fates, were cruel. Nolan knelt by the cot, not as a policeman, but as someone who had spent years earning the trust of frightened kids in the back of an auto shop classroom. He listened to the rhythms of Elena's speech, hearing what went unsaid in the way her voice trembled, in the pauses between sentences. It was the skill of a man who knew the world's rough edges and had chosen, again and again, to answer them with gentleness. He thought about the clues stacking up in the corners of his mind. The brown cloth laced with sawdust, the tire tracks, the half-whispered name, Millstone. Places like that dotted the North Woods, skeletons of old industry, half swallowed by scrub and snow. He wondered which of them hid more than rust and forgotten timber. Rook, restless, left Elena's side to sniff around the cabin. His nose caught something beneath the sagging bunk. With a soft grunt, he pawed until Nolan joined him, fingers closing around a plastic key fob, cracked and dirty, with faded black letters that spelled Millstone Yard. The evidence, small but insistent, seemed to pulse with meaning. It wasn't just her memory. It was physical proof, a trailhead on a map of secrets. Nolan's mind raced quietly. He turned the fob over in his hand, recalling stories of missing people, rumors traded over pie in the diners in Libyan Troy. He remembered how easy it was for the world to forget the lost when winter pressed in, when the land grew too hard for search parties and too quiet for hope. Then, as if on cue, the single light bulb hanging above the stove flickered. Once, twice, then again, a soft, uncertain tremor in the glow. Nolan's eyes snapped to the window. He moved to the door, listening. In the distance, a sound, barely audible, a shuffle, a bump, something metallic brushing wood. The backup generator outside, rarely used, stood just out of sight beneath the eaves. Now it fell silent, as if someone had laid a hand across its humming heart. He stayed still, counting the beats of his own heart. Rook tensed at his side, ears pointed, a low vibration rising in his throat. The fire crackled, wind swirled. Elena, eyes wide now, clutched the edge of the cot. Shadows danced on the walls, and for a moment, the room felt both safe and exposed, sanctuary and snare. Mini cliffhanger number 2. Someone was out there. Someone who had followed the scent of fear and hope to the door of the last safe place left in the woods. The generator's silence throbbed in the dark, a sudden gap in the forest's chorus that made every other sound, every brush of wind, every tick from the stove, feel enormous. Nolan's senses sharpened. He drew a slow, measured breath, eyes flicking from the door to the window and back. Rook stood beside him, not barking, but taut as a drawn bow, his entire body angled toward the unseen. For a moment, all was still. Then, a scrape on the porch, the faintest crunch of snow beneath boot soles. The sound was too deliberate for a deer, too soft for a bear. Nolan's hand hovered near the utility knife on his belt, his other hand motioning for Rook to hold steady. He moved silently, years of forest living honing his instincts into quiet efficiency. Elena, wide-eyed, kept her gaze fixed on the cot's edge, breath shallow. She drew Nolan's jacket tighter around her, blending herself into the thin margin of shadow. The fire flickered, embers shifting, as if the very room itself held its breath. A sudden, sharp rattle at the door. Rook surged forward, not with rage but with calculated force, positioning himself as a living barrier. Nolan watched, heart pounding, the muted light reflecting in the dog's eyes, amber, alert, unblinking. The handle twisted, paused, twisted again. Whoever was outside was testing, not barging in. This was a person who knew how to hunt, who understood the cold patience of waiting for fear to wear down resolve. A beat passed, then the door was shoved open an inch, stopped short by Nolan's wedge. Through the crack, the scent of old leather and cigarettes mingled with cold air. Two figures blurred in the darkness, their outlines bulked with winter coats, faces shadowed by hoods and wool. In the uncertain light, Nolan saw the gleam of something metal, a tool, a crowbar, not quite a weapon, but more than a threat. The first intruder hesitated as Rook's presence registered. The dog's body blocked the way, hackles raised, a soundless warning vibrating deep in his chest. The man stepped back, muttered something to his companion, a voice too low for words, but sharp with tension. The second figure, smaller and quicker, tried to dart past Rook, arm raised. Instantly, Rook lunged, jaws closing on the wrist, not tearing, but locking down, immobilizing. The man yelped, wrenching back, dropping whatever he'd been holding. A dented flashlight clattered to the floorboards. Nolan seized his moment, surging forward to grab the second figure by the collar and pinning him against the doorframe. The first intruder, startled by the speed of it, raised his hands as if weighing whether to fight or run. Nolan kept his tone low, even, laced with the authority of a man who'd taught rowdy teenagers to back off from disaster. But then outside, a third set of footsteps, receding fast. The first man, sensing his companion caught, bolted into the night, boots skidding on the icy porch, vanishing into the blackness between the trees. Rook released the smaller man's wrist just as Nolan twisted the arm behind his back, using a simple restraint hold, a move learned not in the academy, but in the more desperate lessons of daily life. No violence, no bravado, just control, clean and swift. "Leave," Nolan murmured, voice iron. The man whimpered, scrambling up, nearly tripping over his own feet as he fled into the snow, leaving behind a single, battered cell phone and the dropped flashlight. For a few heartbeats, the world stilled again. The wind picked up, tossing snow through the open door before Nolan closed and bolted it tight. Rook circled, sniffing the floor where the strangers had stood, then gave a short, satisfied huff, as if to say, for now, the threat had passed. Nolan knelt, examining the items left behind. The phone, ancient and scuffed, buzzed weakly to life. On its cracked screen, a map, lines drawn in red, a waypoint labeled YS3 near Kootenay Falls. The dropped flashlight bore a smear of brown mud flecked with sawdust, the same scent that clung to the scrap of cloth Nolan had pocketed earlier. He pieced it together in his mind, anxiety and clarity warring. Someone local was involved, someone who knew these woods, who could slip between the ranger stations and the old logging roads without attracting attention. There were more of them, and they were coordinated, hunters, not wanderers. He tried his radio, fingers numb, static, only a faint garble, then silence. But the cell phone, with a trembling bar of signal, let him send a brief, coded text to dispatch. "Near Kootenay Falls, female victim, need medical, multiple suspects." He prayed it would go through. Outside in the dark, a vehicle idled for a moment. A pickup, old without plates. Its headlights flickered on, casting thin beams through the trees, then shut off again. The night was thick with the knowledge that they were being watched. Inside, Rook settled back at Elena's side, his body a wall of comfort and warning. Nolan tucked the battered phone and flashlight away, his mind already moving to the next steps. He felt the scope of the threat expand, not just a random trap in the woods, but a network, a conspiracy, the work of people who believed they owned the silence. He sat near the stove, firelight playing over his face, shoulders bowed, but not broken. For a moment, he watched Elena sleep, Rook's steady breathing beside her. The three of them, battered but still holding the line, alone in a world grown suddenly more dangerous and more precious for it. Outside, somewhere past the circle of light, others waited, planning their next move. But inside, trust had grown a little stronger, and the resolve to fight a little deeper. Daylight returned with a cold, gray reluctance. By morning, the storm had softened, but its aftermath hung over the mountains. Snow drifted high against the cabin walls, all sound muffled, the air brittle and sharp. The ranger station felt smaller somehow, as if the hours of fear and survival had pressed its walls closer. Nolan rose early, sleep no more than a handful of broken minutes, spent listening to every distant crunch or rattle outside. Rook had lain at the door all night, silent, motionless except for the occasional flick of an ear. He took time tending the fire, melting snow for water, checking the girl's bandage. Elena stirred, caught between exhaustion and the kind of watchful alertness born from too many nights spent hoping no one would find her. Her eyes darted to the door with every new sound. She was stronger now, though, the color in her cheeks less ghostly, her hands steadier as she gripped Nolan's offered cup. Rook stayed near, resting his chin on her knee, his gaze unblinking, almost human in its watchfulness. Nolan weighed their options. The risk of staying was growing. The evidence from last night was clear. He brushed snow from the old satellite phone on the shelf. Dead. Battery long since faded. There was no way to call for help but to move to trust the thin chance that the warning text had reached the outside world. He checked his pistol, double-checked the doors, pocketed the clues gathered, key fob, phone, the scrap of cloth. The next step was clear. Elena needed a doctor, and they needed safety. He loaded Elena into the SUV with practiced care, her injury cushioned with blankets. The drive down the winding road felt longer, each turn a test of his nerves. Rook rode shotgun, body angled toward the window, nostrils twitching at every shift of wind, every distant engine echoing across the valley. The Cabinet Peaks Medical Center in Libby looked ordinary on the outside. A squat, red brick building with snow piled high against its walls. A scattering of trucks and snowmobiles parked at odd angles. Inside, the air was warm, bright with antiseptic. Nolan handed Elena off to Dr. Priya Desai, who greeted them with a calm professionalism that didn't ask questions, only nodded once and began to work. Her voice was quiet, a thread of reassurance, her hands swift and sure as she examined the wound and gave Elena a shot for pain. Rook refused to leave Elena's side, even when the nurses tried to shoo him away. He stationed himself in the corner, eyes never straying from the bed. Nolan watched them both, feeling a strange gratitude, a sense of community growing, almost in spite of the danger. The peace was fragile. It lasted only minutes before the door to the exam room opened and a new presence entered. A man in uniform, broad-shouldered and middle-aged, with the stiff posture of authority. Sergeant Clive Morrell. He wore the badge of a local security company, not law enforcement. Border support, the stitched logo read. His smile was practiced, his handshake offered and then withdrawn, eyes flicking over the room, resting for a beat too long on Elena and then on Nolan. Rook rose, hackles bristling. His growl was low, almost imperceptible, a vibration, a warning. Morell's smile thinned. "Fine animal," he remarked, but he did not approach. Dr. Desai stood between him and Elena, her posture a clear boundary. Morell asked after the incident, his tone polite, questions circling, never quite landing. Nolan kept his answers clipped, offering nothing but the basics. Morell's eyes, pale and flat, missed nothing. Elena's breathing quickened. Her hands tightened on the edge of the bed. The memory of his face, half-shadowed by the exam room's fluorescence, froze her. She'd seen him before, not just as a stranger, but as someone present at the periphery of her nightmare. At the mill, a glimpse through a car window, his silhouette against a floodlight, barking orders in a language meant to be forgotten. Nolan saw it all, the silent terror rising in her eyes, the flicker of recognition. Rook inched closer, placing himself between Morell and the girl, a line that would not be crossed. The atmosphere thickened. every breath heavy with what could not be said. Morel's questions grew more pointed, then abruptly stopped. He gave a thin smile, a glance at the clipboard, then excused himself, saying he'd returned for a full report. The door closed behind him with a hush that felt like a threat. In the silence that followed, Elena found her voice, weak but laced with steel. He was there, at the yard. He's with them. Nolan nodded, understanding what must be done. The enemy was no longer faceless. The danger wasn't only in the woods, but here, inside these walls, wearing a badge, hiding behind authority. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Inside, Rook pressed his head into Elena's palm. Nolan stood at the window, watching the parking lot, seeing not the drifting flakes, but the tangled web of trust and betrayal tightening around them. The safe place was no longer safe, and the hunt had just turned personal. Darkness had returned by the time Nolan slipped away from the medical center. Libby's streets, blanketed in snow and quiet, seemed smaller, more secretive, each alley and window a possible set of watching eyes. The sense of safety was gone, replaced by a tension that lived under the skin. Elena, resting in her hospital bed with her leg freshly stitched and splinted, had wanted him to stay. He promised he would not be far, but even as the words left his lips, Nolan knew he could not keep her safe by standing still. Dr. Desai hovered by the door, pressing a business card into his palm, her voice low and urgent. If anyone comes asking questions, if you need help, call me. I'll stall them or get you word. We look after our own here, Nolan. Don't forget it. Outside, snow creaked beneath his boots, sharp and crystalline in the moonlight. The world had a brittle hush, danger lurking in the edges of every shadow. Rook trotted beside him, nose lifted, body humming with alertness, every muscle tuned to some frequency Nolan could only half sense. He needed an ally, someone beyond the brittle reach of badges and threats. He found June McAllister at the Libby Public Library, just as the last light faded from the windows. The library was warm, lined with old pine shelves and the soft musk of leather-bound books, but June herself was sharper than any winter wind. Silver hair clipped short, hands stained with ink and glue from decades of restoring battered volumes. She met Nolan's request without a trace of fear. "Watch over Elena," he asked quietly. "She trusts you. I need someone who can listen, who can see things most folks overlook." June nodded once. "She won't be alone. And neither will you, Nolan. You want a map of every old mill, warehouse, and logging road in the valley? I've got county records, forestry maps, and the dirt that never made it into print." He thanked her, but it was Rook who pressed his muzzle into June's palm, a silent benediction, as if choosing her as part of their small circle. June grinned, ruffled his ears, and went to work. Within minutes, Nolan had a map marked with 3 likely sites near the river, a list of old yard names, and, crucially, records of recent, odd property transfers. Millstone, faded from county rolls, but purchased in cash just last year by a shell company with no listed officers. With a nod of thanks, Nolan set out again, this time on foot, Rook leading through the alleys and back lots where the air was thick with wood smoke and the breath of unseen watchers. Rook's nose found the plastic key fob from the ranger station, Millstone Yard, and he carried it for several blocks, nostrils flaring. In the darkness, the world shrank to sensation, the cold burning in the lungs, the hush of their steps, the flicker of Rook's tail as he caught a scent worth chasing. They passed out of town, crossing onto an old forestry road, blanketed in a crust of fresh snow. The forest closed around them, a silent, ancient congregation. Nolan relied on Rook's lead, letting the dog set the pace. They reached a junction where the smell of oil and mint cigarettes hung in the air. Here the path forked, one trail winding toward the river, the other climbing through thick stands of spruce. Rook stopped at the trailhead, nose buried in a patch of disturbed snow. Nolan crouched to see. Beneath the drift, a half-buried bottle cap, its rim sticky with the smell of menthol. Rook pawed once, then turned sharply, leading toward Kootenai Falls Trail. Nolan followed, pulse hammering in his throat. The way was steep and winding, the moonlight fragmented by shifting clouds. Rook moved like a shadow, body low to the ground, every step measured. Nolan trusted him implicitly, his own senses sharpening to match the dog's vigilance. At the river, the sound of rushing water masked their passage. Far ahead, through a stand of fir, a sliver of light flickered. A flashlight, quickly doused, then raised again. A whisper of voices, too far for words, but clear in their intent. Someone was patrolling the area, moving in restless circuits, watching the old mill. Nolan pressed himself against a fallen log, breathing in the scent of snow, cold earth, and the metallic tang of fear. Rook crawled forward, silent, until he reached the edge of the clearing. There, beneath a drift, his paws uncovered the rough edge of an old, rotted hatch. A storm cellar, long forgotten, hidden by branches and snow. Nolan's breath caught. This was no accident. Rook had found the way. The hatch was frozen but not locked. From within, the faintest echo of movement. The scrape of boots, the muffled sound of breathing. Above them, clouds thinned, and moonlight poured into the hollow, illuminating the ancient timbers, the dark mouth of the hidden place. Nolan steadied himself, letting Rook's presence anchor him. They were not alone in this. Not anymore. Trust was a living thing, grown between hardship and hope, and tonight it would be tested. In the silence, Nolan listened to the river, the wind, and Rook's steady, patient breathing, a reminder that in the deepest dark, courage was often quiet, and loyalty had a scent that could never be mistaken. Cold air pressed down from the river as Nolan eased open the hatch, its ancient hinges protesting in a whisper. The world above was a black ocean, clouds smothering any trace of starlight. But down here, the dark felt different, more immediate, filled with the electricity of breath and movement. For a moment, Nolan paused, letting his eyes adjust, letting his senses unfurl into the silence. He could hear nothing but the distant rush of Kootenai Falls and the steady pulse of his own heart. Rook dropped first, landing with a whisper in the dirt below. The German shepherd's form was a shadow among shadows, his nose low, moving forward in careful bursts. Sniff, wait, listen. Nolan followed, boots barely scraping the packed earth, closing the hatch behind them. He did not dare use a bright light. Instead, he thumbed on a red-filtered beam, casting the world in blood-tinged silhouettes. The old storm cellar smelled of rot and rust and human fear. A narrow passage led deeper, its walls timbered with logs long gone soft with age. In the dark, even a footstep felt dangerous. Nolan moved quietly, remembering old search and rescue drills, patience first, then precision. Rook led the way, body low, paws never rushing, every sense straining for danger. At a bend he stopped, head cocked, and issued a soft, warning chuff. Nolan froze, pressing his body flat to the rough wall. Above them, muffled by layers of dirt and wood, footsteps moved, slow, searching, uncertain if they hunted for someone or ran from their own shadows. A distant voice, harsh and thin, drifted through a crack in the timbers, someone shouting a name. Then silence. Rook waited, muscles rippling under his coat, ears turning to catch the faintest vibrations. When the noise faded, he padded on, claws barely audible against the floor. The corridor opened suddenly into a small, low-ceilinged chamber, a storage space repurposed, the faintest glow of a flashlight leaking through a knothole above. Nolan's breath hitched. Two girls, huddled together against the far wall, their faces drawn and sleepless, eyes red from the cold and terror. They shrank from the light until Rook crept forward, lowering himself, tail sweeping gently, emitting a low, rumbling whine that sounded almost like a lullaby. The younger of the two, perhaps 16, reached a trembling hand to his muzzle. Rook pressed closer, letting her fingers trace the line of his snout, then glanced back at Nolan, as if to say, "It's safe. Come." Nolan squatted low, whispering his reassurance, never touching the girls but showing his open hands, letting trust bloom in small, cautious increments. He gave each a square of chocolate and a sip from his water bottle, speaking only enough to ground them in reality. "You're found. We're getting out." Outside, distant headlights swept through the trees, pale, searching fingers. The sound of engines carried down into the earth, closer now. And the girls stiffened, fear threatening to paralyze. Nolan motioned for silence, quickly pointing to the far side of the room where a second exit, half collapsed and obscured by crates, waited. He led the girls, Rook circling behind, herding with subtle nudges and low, reassuring sounds. The dog's body moved like water, all muscle and instinct, pressing just close enough to keep them moving, but never trapping. Nolan braced the old wooden exit open, wincing as it groaned, but the night outside swallowed the noise. Snow swirled, flakes big as feathers, masking their shapes as they slipped into the trees. As they hurried along the old path marked on June's map, the glow of headlights crept closer, sweeping the main trail. Too near, too bright. Nolan froze, mind racing. Then Rook, sensing the risk, turned away from the group. With a single sharp bark, he bolted through the open, racing across the beam of light. The vehicle brakes squealed, doors slammed, shouts rose. A confusion of men and noise, all focus yanked toward the streak of black and tan vanishing into the night. Nolan took his chance, guiding the girls down a frozen drainage, ducking into the shelter of dense thicket. They pressed against the earth, barely breathing as shouts and searchlights tangled in the trees above. Rook's bark rang out again, farther away, luring the pursuers along the ridgeline, drawing attention, giving Nolan precious minutes. The escape became a blur of movement and cold. The crack of branches, the hush of boots sliding over ice, the burn of lungs filling with winter air. Nolan counted each heartbeat, every yard of ground covered, knowing Rook's act was more than distraction. It was faith, trust in the thin thread that bound them all. Finally, breathless, they reached the secondary trailhead, hidden behind a fallen log. The girls collapsed against Nolan, sobbing, not with fear, but with the wild relief of rescue. Above them, distant now, the noise of engines and men faded, swallowed by snow and the river's constant roar. Nolan scanned the darkness, waiting. A shape appeared, Rook, panting, coat rimed with ice, eyes bright with pain and triumph. The dog pressed his head against Nolan's knee, silent, his body trembling not from cold, but from the spent adrenaline of his lonely, loyal charge. For a moment, they were all still, the rescued and their rescuers, hearts beating together, the storm of pursuit held at bay. Nolan wrapped the girls in spare blankets, watching the dog he trusted most settle close, breathing slow, steady, alive. In the hush that followed, Nolan listened, to the girls' shuddering breaths, to Rook's quiet whine, to the promise of dawn somewhere beyond the trees. Hope, like a dog's loyalty, survived even the deepest dark. The cold seemed sharper after the rescue, a living presence that bit through gloves and breath, threading its way into every crack of hope. Nolan, shivering but resolute, guided the girls and Rook through a circuitous path down to the edge of Millstone Yard. The abandoned lumber compound rose before them, moonlight glinting off rusted sheet metal and broken glass. Every shadow felt pregnant with secrets. The snow underfoot was churned by the passing of boots and tires, but for the first time, Nolan was the hunter, not the hunted. The girls, spent and wary, clung together, while Rook kept to Nolan's side, body low and silent, his gait uneven from the chase but his eyes still burning bright. The whole world felt suspended, balanced on the edge of action and aftermath. Nolan's first task was the ledger. He remembered Elena's stories, the rumors of paperwork, coded deliveries, a hidden order in the chaos. He moved quickly, scanning the compound until his fingers found a battered junction box under the eaves of an old workshed. He popped the cover, breath steaming in the cold, and inside, half hidden behind dead fuses and a tangle of cobwebs, was a rain-swollen black notebook. He flicked through the pages by headlamp, lists of first names and initials, shipping tags, codes for containers, even the serial numbers of heavy equipment. At the back, tucked into a plastic pocket, lay a set of shipping receipts with numbers that matched the notes on the battered phone. He recognized some names from the missing persons files. Others, unknown, like ghosts passing through this borderland. A clatter behind him, a door swinging open. Sergeant Clive Morrell emerged. Bulked in his winter parka, eyes flat as pewter coins, the glint of a sidearm under his coat. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. Instead, he smiled, tight, controlled, chilling. "You have no idea what you're part of, Pierce. This is bigger than you, bigger than this town." Nolan said nothing. He slipped the notebook into his jacket, standing his ground. Rook positioned himself between Nolan and Morrell, his growl deepening, vibrating in the hard air. A pause, then the whine of tires, headlights sweeping across the compound. A pickup, black, idling just inside the gate. Morrell glanced toward it, and in that instant, Nolan realized this was the play. Morrell stalling, waiting for backup, for the escape to complete while he played king in this rotten kingdom. Nolan moved deliberately, stepping into the floodlight's glare, exposing the notebook in his hands. He reached over, flipped a switch on the wall. An old work lamp snapped on, spilling harsh light across the yard, right into the lens of a security camera he'd spotted earlier, its power cable spliced and hidden beneath a stack of crates. The camera's red light glowed. Every word, every gesture, recorded and beamed back to whatever office still cared about proof. "Careful who's watching," Nolan murmured. Voice low but steady. Morrell's eyes narrowed. He took a step forward, hand dropping to his hip. Rook tensed, ready. The dog's breath came in short bursts, white in the beam, a living barrier. But Nolan was not alone. At the edge of the yard, a cluster of headlights, county patrol, and behind them, the green and gold flash of federal vehicles. The cavalry had arrived, not by chance but by design. June, following Nolan's code, had sent location and evidence straight to Special Agent Samuel Ortega, who led the squad. The tension snapped. Ortega's voice cut through the cold, his stride unhurried, pistol drawn but pointed down. "Drop it, Morel. You're done." The moment stretched. Morel hesitated, but the evidence was everywhere. The notebook, the video, the battered phone, and the silent witnesses by Nolan's side. Rook stepped forward, silent and implacable, cutting off Morel's retreat. The girls, trembling but upright, stood behind Nolan, living proof that whatever darkness had ruled this place was about to be pierced by morning. There was a final shattering beat as Morel's composure cracked. He spat out a curse, dropped his weapon, and sank to his knees in the snow, the fight draining out of him all at once. The air filled with the sudden activity of agents, Ortega's team swarming, evidence bags opening, orders barked. Nolan felt the tension bleed out of his body, leaving only exhaustion and the echo of adrenaline. The twist settled quietly as the federal agents dug deeper. Morel was not the center, only a node. His phone revealed texts from a logistics manager on the railroad, hints at a broader web, more yards, more missing faces. This was not the end, only the crack in the dam. But it was enough, for now. Nolan watched as Rook, battered but unbowed, approached one of the girls and nudged her hand, a gentle gesture that broke the last dam of fear in her eyes. She collapsed to her knees, hugging the dog, her silent sobs shaking the night. Above them, the first hints of dawn painted the snow pink and gold. For a long moment, Nolan let the silence stand, letting it be filled not with pain, but with relief. The nightmare was broken, not gone but shattered at the edges, the day forcing the dark to scatter. In the new light, Nolan looked at his battered hands, at the dog who had led him through every shadow, and at the faces of the rescued. He felt, for the first time, a hope as sharp and cold and clear as the winter air. They had done what needed to be done, and whatever storms still waited, they would not face them alone. Winter's grip on Libby softened, not in the weather. Snow still piled thick against the sidewalks and rooftops, the river still roaring with the wildness of thaw and ice, but in the way the town breathed. At the Libby Memorial Center, the community gathered beneath strings of yellow light, their faces ruddy from the cold and hope mixing in their voices. The room smelled of hot cocoa, pine, and the tang of wool drying by the old radiators. The world outside was unchanged, but the hearts inside were altered by what had passed. There was no parade, no trumpets, just the honest work of a town reclaiming its own. Nolan stood near the window, nursing a mug between battered hands, his police jacket traded for an old flannel shirt. The fatigue hadn't left him, but it had transformed. Less a weight, more a reminder of what it meant to endure. Rook curled beneath the folding chairs, his head on his paws, one ear cocked for familiar footsteps, the other already dreaming. The girls who had been taken, now swaddled in borrowed coats and handmade scarves, lingered close to the wood stove, watched over by June and Dr. Desai. Their voices were soft, halting, each word a step toward the surface after weeks in the dark. Some would not stay in Libby, but none would leave without the memory of hands reaching for them, first in rescue, then in kindness. Elena was there too, her legs still stiff, but her eyes clearer than the day Nolan first found her. She held herself taller, finding her way into small moments of laughter, shy and searching. She had chosen to stay through the hearings, to speak not only for herself but for those who could not. At the front of the room, a small table held simple tokens, a battered ledger, a plastic key fob, a strip of brown cloth, each one a reminder of the secrets that no longer ruled the valley. The sheriff, grayer and less distant than before, shook Nolan's hand, then knelt beside Rook, stroking the dog's fur with quiet reverence. In the hush, Elena approached with a length of red yarn, a collar knitted in slow hours at the library with June and the other rescued girls. Her hands trembled, but her smile was sure. She knelt beside Rook, who raised his head and watched her with a solemn trust. "So others can see you first," she whispered, slipping the bright band around his neck. Rook leaned into her touch, letting out a soft, contented sigh. The room seemed to exhale as one. Afterward, Nolan wandered to the side, gazing at a corkboard now tacked with a new map of Kootenai, colorful pins marking the places where hope had been lost and then found. He watched as a boy, his grandfather's hand on his shoulder, pointed to Millstone Yard, asking, "Is it safe now?" Nolan answered not with certainty, but with honesty. "It's safer. Because you'll remember. Because you'll care." As dusk fell, the crowd lingered, trading stories by the fire. Not all were about rescue. Some were about gardens rescued from frost, a neighbor's borrowed plow, the slow rebuilding of trust after years of silence. The stories stacked, each one a little fire against the cold, proof that hope was not just a single act, but a habit, something learned and relearned in the presence of others. June sat in a corner, glasses low on her nose, teaching a rescued girl the careful art of sewing a book's spine. Dr. Desai poured tea, her touch gentle, her eyes always alert for tremors in the hands of those she served. The sheriff wrote out thank-you notes by hand, each one a promise that what happened here would not be forgotten or buried. Nolan, watching Rook doze by the stove, felt something stir in his chest, a sense that he was part of something larger than pain, something held together by 1,000 small mercies. The room's warmth was not just from the fire, but from the stubborn, ordinary courage of those who stayed, who kept watch, who listened when others had been made voiceless. As the evening ended, the lights dimmed, and people began to leave in twos and threes, their laughter trailing out into the snow. Elena lingered, looking to Nolan, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not afraid to remember anymore." He nodded, meeting her gaze. "Neither am I." Outside, the town lay still. The river's song rose, steady as a heartbeat. Nolan walked home beneath a sky dense with stars. Rook padding at his side, the red band bright against the white. Behind them, the Memorial Center's windows glowed, a beacon against the long night. And in the quiet, hope endured, not loud or triumphant, but steady, shared, and real.